Hello, so today I'm going to be ranking set 14 units again in a tier list, but this is, like before, going to be a for fun tier list because we're still in PvE, and this is going to be based on how interesting or fun I find the units. So with set 14, there's going to be all these new abilities and fantastical designs, especially with the 5 cost and the 4 cost. I want to go through most of these units and kind of say to myself, is this new ability or these new units interesting or cool that I'm excited to play around them? Are they something I haven't seen before? Or is it just like a reprint or a typical, like, you know, archetype? Like, oh, that's a typical tank or a typical damage dealer. I'm just going to talk about them through that, with S being the most interesting units that I think are really cool and have like this novel, interesting design, or a fun design that maybe is returning that I think is really cool. And D being, I'm not too excited to play around these. So we're going to get started. Before I do, make sure to like and subscribe if you like my content. And also check out some of my other videos. I usually do more informative guides. They're meant to be more like instructional. And like I said, because it's PvE, we try and do a little bit more for fun stuff. Now, let's go through them all. So we're going to start with the 5 cost, and then we're going to do the 4 cost, and I'm going to select some of the 1 and 2 cost and 3 cost units, because I don't think it's worth ranking all of them, because usually like the ones that are more interesting in design are the 5 costs a lot of the time. So let's go through it. Aurora. So Aurora has this ability where she jumps on your bench, and by jumping on your bench, she basically becomes untargetable, and she swaps with a unit on the board. I think this is really new. I think this is really cool and exciting. I'm going to put Aurora in S tier. I think there's lots of interactions that I still don't know about yet. I think that it's an interesting and new design. That's like how we're going to start the tier list, right? When you look at a 5 cost, a lot of times, the 5 costs that are the coolest are the ones that have like these interesting or novel cool mechanics that they kind of like break the game or break what you understand or know about the game by basically like following their own rules or making their own rules. And I think that's what Aurora does. I think that's pretty cool. So I would love to see how this develops. I'd love to see how it ends up in the set. I already know that there's all these awkward techs. Like if you haven't seen, there's Aurora with trench coat, and then you summon 3 units on your bench and all sorts of crazy stuff like that. So I think it's fun. I think it's exciting. I think it's refreshing. I think it's new and cool. So it goes into S tier. Now, Garen. Garen, I think, is cool. Basically, Garen's main thing is that he's God of the Net. In terms of his ability, or just besides like the actual like trait God of the Net, that basically what it does is every couple turns you could pick a synergy that you then add to the rest of the board. And it's cool. It's new. It's not something I've seen before. I think it's kind of stupid. No offense. Like it looks really strong. It looks really obviously good. And I think it's a cool and interesting idea, but it's just like, to me, it falls a little bit flat. Now, I say those words, they sound a little bit harsh. I'm just saying, compared to Aurora, I'm just going to put Garen in A tier. It's still new. It's still interesting. It's still cool. But if I'm comparing it relative to Aurora, which I think is S tier, it's just kind of like basic. It's like, okay, you just slam extra synergy on your board. You transfer synergies to other units on your board. You know, other than that, he's just like a frontline attack dealer, you know, gets a shield, does damage, right? It's nothing like crazy, right? Like, to me at least. So I put him in A tier though, because God of the Net is really cool and that it's new and it's exciting, and I would love to play around it. It's just that he's not at the same tier as Aurora for me. Next, Kabuko. So Kabuko, I'm going to put in B tier. Now, Kabuko has like a lot of text and a lot of reading. Basically has a stun, he has this extra durability, he has this extra living, Omnivamp, empowering himself, big mana threshold, but nothing about Kabuko really screams to me crazy. Now, I think the Kabuko design is cool. I think like anything that kind of appeals to like that 8-bit style look is something that I'm like, oh hell yeah, I'm on board, this is cool, I like it. So I think Kabuko is cool and all, but he's like kind of like average to me, right? There's nothing new and exciting to me about him that much. Like, you know, he just makes like a giant stun and he has a bunch of shield and stuff. Compared to Aurora and Garen, I think he's a little bit below. So I would put him in B tier because it's not something that's super crazy. It just seems like pretty like standard 5 cost things if I'm just being a little bit honest. Now he is a little bit cooler with like Cyber Boss upgrade and stuff like that, but I think he still belongs B tier. Renekton kind of has like his cool thing where he's like eating a user and he gets some extra AD and HP. So I think that's kind of cool. But I'll also put him in B tier. He just feels like a melee frontline kind of user. You know what I mean? It feels like, you know, he's just kind of like attacking a lot. His attacks, he's not like, you know, besides just doing a shit ton of damage, he doesn't seem to do anything that's like, wow, that's insane, this is like game breaking or like interesting and cool, right? Like, you know, Aurora, she hops on your bench, right? Like, that's really cool. She becomes untargetable. She's just on your bench, right? What's she doing there? Like, there's never a unit on your bench, right? like besides the eating, maybe the eating he goes in kind of like A tier, but I'm willing to put him in B tier. I think he's not as cool as Garen Aurora, so I think he's like somewhere around Kabuko level of like, you know, he feels and looks like a 5 cost. Samira, I think Samira's like C tier. If I'm talking about the rest of them, I think Samira is, out of them all, one of the more basic ones. She kind of just like does her cast and then does this huge, like, you know, hits a bunch of things and dances around the board a little bit. Nothing about her really screams to me like exciting, new, fresh, different. She kind of just feels like a damage dealer. She kind of feels like a 5 cost. Now her ability is a little bit different because she goes from backline to being in melee range, and then she has like this whole other thing, and then with Am she gets like extra shots and stuff like that, which is kind of cool. But to me at least, like, you know, Kabuko at least has like the cyber boss upgrades and the cool stun and all that stuff that makes him kind of like interesting a little bit, and Renekton has like the cool eating mechanic, so that's why she's maybe a little bit lower for me. Urgot has an execute and he does this stuff. I think Urgot's in A tier, honestly. Maybe not. I'd put Urgot in B tier actually. I think Urgot's like similar to the other ones in that he kind of does like this cool thing. He has like this execute and he does damage and it's kind of cool and fun. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh. Like maybe Urgot goes in A tier. You know what? Maybe Urgot goes in A tier. I'm down. Urgot, the only reason I think Urgot goes in A tier is because not only does he has the execute, he also like summons components, which is really cool. So you have an execute on a summon component user. There were units like that in the past, right? Like there was Lysandra that allowed you to scale really well in set 11, I believe. So he's kind of like a Lysandra, except he's backline and he has an execute as well. So it's kind of cool, and he also pulls in the unit to execute, so he kind of removes them from the board for that last little bit. So I think it's kind of cool. Yeah, all in a 5 cost. It's kind you know what? Execute it's kind of like old. Maybe I'll put him in B tier. I think I'll put him in B tier. He'll be like top of B tier, like Renekton, right? It's not anything that's cool or game breaking, but it's kind of just good. It's kind of just solid. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Viego, I think Viego's pretty boring. No, Viego summons the extra clone. I'll put him in B tier as well, right? Because of the clone summon. But other than that, he's just like an AP damage dealer. Zac, I actually think Zac's kind of A tier. I like that in your shop, you get these globs that you can use to scale them up infinitely. I think it's a little bit cooler than some of the other ones, right? Whenever I'm thinking of like the cooler, more fun ones, it's the ones that kind of like change the game a little bit or change the way you would play the game. So Zac especially, like there's a lot of tech around. You put in Zac versus take him out to get like the stacks in when you're rolling, and then like you could take him out and then you don't get the stacks. Like it's cool. It's like interacting with your shop. It's giving you like an extra layer of playing around, and I think that's cool. So I put in A tier because it's on that similar theme to me of being like new and fresh or refreshing and exciting. Now I think there was a Zac that was similar in the past that scaled infinitely. I don't know for sure, so I can't speak on it, but I started playing in set 9, so to me it feels very new and fresh and cool, and I look at it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. And he's also traitless, which makes him feel like a very put in any board type of unit, similar to Garen, right? Both these units, they kind of feel like they're like these pinnacles of flex where you just shove them in no matter what. It doesn't matter what you're playing towards. If you have a free spot, it's either Garen or Zac a lot of the time. And with due reason, they have really strong abilities that seem very cool and scale really well into late game. Now, let's go through the forecasts. So the forecast is going to be a little bit different. So I'm actually going to clear the tier list here. Because I want to just have a fresh thing for the forecast, if that makes sense. I don't like this tier list maker, by the way. I hate how it scrolls you back down each time. Anyways, Annie. So Annie summons a Tibbers, which I think is kind of cool. So she kind of works as like a damage dealer, but also provides you with like a decent amount of frontline. So I want to put her like in terms of a 4 cost. Now the way that we rank these, the reason I replaced the board is because I don't want to rank the 4 cost relative to the 5 cost, because obviously the 5 cost in general, the baseline is that they're more exciting than the 4 costs. So we've cleared the board because we're just going to rank the 4 costs relative to other 4 costs. And relative to the other 4 costs, I'm a little bit more excited to play around Annie because she seems to have like this extra effect where she not only can play around being like an AP caster, but she also provides extra frontline, which can add like a little bit of stability to boards, which is kind of cool, right? To have like a primary damage dealer that, you know, you want to build towards like doing damage, but then also contributes to the front line in a very meaningful way. Felios just feels like an auto attacker. I'm gonna put him in C tier. It just feels like a regular ass auto attacker that just does the same as normal. Maybe he's a little bit better. We'll put him in B tier maybe. He's kind of cool, I guess. I don't know. It's B tier or C tier. I'll start with C tier and we'll see where it goes from there. Brand feels very basic. He just feels like I do damage to many units and they kind of spread towards other units. They just feel like basic reprints of other units that already existed. Now Cho'Gath kind of scales a lot. I'm going to put him in B tier because of the inter-round scaling. It's kind of fun and exciting. I'm a little bit more excited to play a Cho'Gath than I am to play a Philios or Brand. Just because Cho'Gath kind of has like an ability where, you know, let's see how high we can get that number. You know what I mean? He increases in health as the fight goes on. And there's lots of cool interactions with that, lots of cool boards, and he's been relatively strong in PB because of it. But I think part of it is also it just seems a little bit more exciting and fun to play. It's like, okay, let's see how big we can make our Cho'Gath, right? If there's different scalings, like things that scale you ahead of time, preparations, or things that can give you more HP, and then you have the scaling HP with the Cho'Gath. It just feels like something that has the opportunity to be like, hey, I can do some more interesting stuff with this compared to Aphelios Brand. Leona, I think Leona goes in... Honestly, I think Leona goes in A tier. She has a lot of ability. Maybe B tier. She's like a basic frontline unit. But she has some extra effects, so we'll put her in B tier because she's kind of exciting, right? She gains the... she has a stun, and then she also does... she also makes people do bonus magic damage. MF, I think, goes in B tier, right? In terms of like an AD caster type, she seems kind of cool. She has like a really good spread in her damage. I really like the way that her damage kind of works, or how it looks, and as well as how it can scale up really well if you have your Kingpin bonus in. But it's nothing super exciting or crazy. Like I think Annie is just a little bit more interesting in that regard. Nico, I think I'll put in A tier. I think she just does her job. Sorry, B tier. I think she does her job pretty well. She has a chill, but other than that, it's just kind of like okay, right? Is she the same as Aphelios Brand? Probably not. But I think that's kind of cool. Sejuani, I think Sejuani is B tier as well. She's just like she's just kind of like a stun bot, honestly. She just kind of reminds me of like a classic stun bot. I'm gonna put her in C tier, right? There's nothing that's crazy about her. I think that, you know, maybe Nico also should be in C tier. I'm not sure. I might be biased towards Nico, but Sejuani, I think she's just like a regular stun bot. Nothing about her is super exciting. I'm not like, oh damn, it's a Sejuani game, I'm so excited. It just feels like, okay, stun bot, you know what I mean? Vex, however, Vex is a little bit more interesting to me because Vex has like this weird build that she has going on, right? She has like this Omnivamp scaling, and then also like this traveling where she travels the shadow, but then also does magic damage like as she passes through. It just feels like there's a lot going on, right? But maybe I'll just put her in B tier as well. I think she just goes in B tier. I don't think she's as cool as Annie. But she's a little bit more interesting than Aphelios Brand because she seems like she has, like, you know, they said that they want to make her that she scales a little bit better off Omnivamp, which works well with Divinicorp if you have like the Omnivamp bonus for 7 Divinicorp. It lets her cap a little bit higher, but it also makes Gunblade really good on her. And I think that's what they're trying to go for, like making Gunblade really good on Vex when they reworked her or made her to be a little bit different. So I think that's fine. But I think it's a little bit more interesting than some of the C tiers, but it's just like basic. It just feels like a 4 cost to me. Xayah, I think, is the same as these guys. It's just like, it feels like a reprint. I feel like we've had this Xayah before. Is this not very similar to the Xayah in the 5 cost Xayah in set 11? Am I crazy? Or like Xayah in set 9, like 9.5, I guess. She got added after. But you know what I mean? It's like there's nothing crazy about it. She just like does AD damage, right? Zed, I think... Does Zed go into B tier or A tier? I think he goes into B tier. He's just like an assassin. I think that's fine. Zeri now we get into the talking points. Zeri, I think, is S tier, right? I think Zeri, out of all the 4 costs, this unit looks so cool. And I'm so excited to play Zeri because Zeri, she does like this thing where she makes these after images that also do damage. And there's a lot of builds you can do with these after images. Like the after images don't crit naturally. So if you put IE on her, then the after images crit. And then like you have to scale her after images. So a lot of times you want attack speed so that after images do a bunch of damage. But she feels like a unique take on a unit, right? She does something interesting and cool that's a little bit newer than some of the other things. And I think that puts her into S tier because compared to the other ones, right, like she actually has, like, you know, besides just her basic scaling and doing damage, she has like this thing where she's summoning extra clones. They're now doing extra damage. Do you want to build towards the clones doing damage? How much attack speed do you want? Do you want more AP so that the clones last a little bit longer, so you're keeping more uptime on, like, you know, keeping as many afterimage as possible. Like it kind of feels, it feels like there's some room there to like think about it at least, which makes me kind of curious to see how things work on patch to patch, how she kind of plays out in the set. Lastly, we have Ziggs. I think Ziggs is similar to Annie. I'm not gonna put Ziggs here. I like the plus shape. I think the plus shape is kind of new and interesting. And I like with Cyber Boss that it makes it kind of position. And then there's also the thing where it's like if you only hit one unit, you do twice as much damage. It feels a little bit more cool to play around, a little bit more interesting. So I'm willing to put in A tier, a little bit above the rest. Of course, this is all my opinion. You might think some 5 costs or some 4 costs are a little bit cooler than others. But other than that, these are all the ones that I think are kind of like, you know, a little bit more interesting. In terms of like, you know, being something that we haven't seen before. And I think Zeri especially, Annie at least for me, being both like, you know, kind of having like a frontline aspect as well as a backline aspect is kind of cool. And then Ziggs, I think with the shape, I think these 3 are like the coolest 4 costs. Then after that, I would say probably MF I think is the next coolest. I just really like the way that she spreads her damage, and it seems kind of cool the way that she can hit like a whole board, just delete a whole board. But other than that, these ones are kind of like pretty cool. And these ones just feel like, you know, the resident, this is the unit of the set, right? The resident, like, you know, if we're comparing like Gwinsu holders, for example, like Aphelios versus Zeri, like that's what I mean. Like Zeri is like a cool, newer take on it where it feels a little bit interesting, but like Aphelios is just like the typical, like, hey, just like put a Gwinsu on him and let him rock, you know what I mean? And power some autos or something. Right, it doesn't feel like as crazy. Same with Brand and Zaya, and Sejuani just feels like a stun bot. She just feels like the classic. So now let's go through this. Oh, there's a clear button at the top. I should just do that. There, clear, bang. Now let's go through some of the 1 and 2 costs. So I'm just gonna try and rank the ones I think a lot of these are basically just basic. Nothing about them really screams to me as being super cool or anything. So I'm not gonna go through the problem of putting them all into the tier list. I think majority of the video is just the 4 and 5 costs. But if we're looking at them, I'll try and pick out the ones I think are a little bit cooler in design. I really like all the AMP units. I think AMP as a trait is really cool, so I'm a little bit biased towards these ones that kind of have that inherent scaling where their ability does like more things based on the amount of AMP that they have. But Shaco, he just scales off AD, so he feels like kind of like a reprint, but I guess it's kind of cool if you've never seen a unit that does that. Which units do I think are really cool though of these ones? I don't even know. I don't think any of them, honestly. All of them kind of feel very similar to previous iterations of what they existed. So I don't think I'm going to rank any of them. Who's my favorite of each cost? Let's go by that. Who do I think is the coolest? The coolest 1 cost, I think, is Silas. Because if Silas gets poppin', he seems kind of interesting because he has this thing where it's like he gains extra health if they die or if he takes part of takedown. If we're talking about like 2 costs, I like LeBlanc in terms of her design. I like her that she gets like every cast she gets 1 more sigil, right? I think that's kind of cool. So she scales into the fight and she has like that kind of effect to her. But I might be biased because I like strategists a lot. And then in terms of 3 costs, I think my favorite one is probably I think I like Fiddlesticks the most in terms of being like a cool design. Because Fiddlesticks just has like this cool effect where he just like shreds a bunch of people. But he's like a 2-range unit, right? So he's not like a fully ranged unit, but you kind of sit him in the 2nd row, which is kind of nice. So it's kind of like an interesting take on like a ranged unit. I think that's kind of okay. But anyways, thanks for watching. Hopefully this was a little bit of a fun video. I've been really busy the last couple days, so I'm making a couple shorter videos. Let me know in the comments who you are most excited to play around. Who do you think is the coolest new unit that's coming to set 14 or the coolest reprint? What's going to be your favorite unit that you want to try out first when you play set 14? Thanks for watching and have a great day and see ya. Bye-bye.